future. I'll call on you, or go ahead and throw it in the chat and we can find a way to work it on in. Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Irvin. By way of further background, Josh Rudolph, Senior Fellow, German Marshall Fund, worked on Ukraine governance policies and U.S. supporting Ukraine across several Washington jobs, White House National Security Council under both Republican and Democrat presidents, U.S. Treasury, IMF, USAID. Well, let's try to be really quick at the top here because we really want to focus on your questions. So I'll chime in throughout to answer your questions, but for now, we'll just introduce our terrific panel of speakers who span a wide cross-section of regions from the United States to Brussels to Kyiv. So let's start with Ukraine. Dr. Hanna Hopko is a former member of parliament and head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Rada, a civic leader in the Euromaidan, chairwoman of ANTS, the National Interests Advocacy Network, and co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory, and more. And so my question for Hanna is, from your perspective in Ukraine, why will continued international support remain vital? And if you could just keep it to 3 minutes so that we can get through each of us 3 minutes and then move on. Over to you, Hanna.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for organizing this important online discussion. So, as you rightly mentioned, 11 years of ongoing Russian aggression. If more than 10 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine from the attempted illegal annexation of Crimea, it's really important to remind about this fact. So it was Russia alone. So now you see North Korea, not just ballistic missiles, but North Korean troops helping Russians because Russia faces enormous problems with mobilization, with the manpower. So also Iranian kamikaze drones and ballistic missiles, and China is also supplying Russia with machinery, with different chips, components, and others. So axis of tyrannies already institutionalized, and they are seeking that Ukraine is being defeated and actually the West is losing. And I think it's really important to explain that within these 11 years of ongoing Russian aggression and last almost 1,000 days of Russia committing genocide against Ukraine, so it's important to express gratitude to Ukrainian soldiers, our brave defenders, and also to express gratitude to all partners who contributed already and who helped Ukraine. But I think that it's also important to explain that if someone expected Ukraine to fall within 72 hours when the full-scale war started, so it's already 3 years when we demonstrate fighting spirit, when the resilience of the society, of Ukrainian society, is still very strong. And the only thing is needed, the political will and commitment to deliver faster, more timely, and in larger quantities weapon. So I hope after US elections, Biden will finally make a decision by lifting restrictions on deep strikes, and more ATACMS will arrive. Also, Poland and Romania will get green light on intercepting missiles and helping also Ukraine creating this air defense shield. And also security guarantees, because it's important to understand how to end the war when the signals to axis of tyrannies will be sent, because it's important that Russia pay, how to make Russia pay, how to provide guarantees, security guarantees for Ukraine, and how to end a sustainable peace. So I think that Ukrainians and especially our armed forces, which are now in Kursk operation, if someone asked me in 2014, Hanna, Could you imagine that this war will last more than a decade and Ukrainian brave forces will be in at the territory of Russia, and two nuclear powers will fight against Ukraine? Probably at that time, I will say no. I cannot imagine this. So, but I think this war is winnable, and our military people explain their position why this war is winnable and what is needed that Ukraine receive all and actually capabilities. We have air superiority, which is needed because even with the F-16s, without radars needed, it's still not what we were hoping to get. So just to conclude my message, this war is winnable, that Ukrainian society and our soldiers, defenders, the fighting spirit is so high, and it's important that the victory mood and commitments are here, because simultaneously we are seeing how threats are growing in Europe, Middle East, East Asia, and all this interconnected. So it's in the interest of Western civilization, it's in the interest of NATO, the EU, that Ukraine defeat Russian imperialism.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Had I started with one point, it would have been the same point, that the war is winnable, although I would have explained it from a very different, the Western political economy perspective. We can come back to that in the Q&A. So let's turn to our next speaker now. Melinda Haring is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. She's an internationally recognized expert on Ukraine, and she has many other impressive current and former affiliations, but she is here in her capacity with the Atlantic Council. So my question for Melinda is, how do you think the incoming Trump administration and congressional majority leadership should approach support for Ukraine? The floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you and good morning, Josh. Really appreciate this opportunity to be here. So I'm going to slightly amend the question because we have 10 weeks of President Biden in office, and I think it's important to talk about that lame duck period. A lot can be done, and I think that there's two priorities. Right now is the time for the Biden administration to remove the restrictions on the ATACMS missiles. I think there's a pretty strong consensus, Josh, that President Biden can ignore his fears of escalation, and that President Putin isn't going to start a nuclear war as the administrations change. So now is the opportunity to do it. There's plenty of targets that remain. The National Security Council and the intelligence community say that's not true. Independent analysts say that's nonsense. There's plenty of targets that physically cannot be removed, and we should take advantage of that moment now. The other big opportunity for the Biden administration is to seize and transfer the $5 billion in Russian central bank reserves, and it needs to be done now in order to make sure that it's done correctly. And the eyes are on the Biden administration. So you asked me a wonderful theoretical question. What should the next administration do when it concerns Ukraine? So I know we live in reality. The answer that I give is probably not likely, but the obvious answer is that the next administration should do what the Biden administration didn't do. It should declare victory is the outcome, and it should remove the restrictions on weapons, and it should give Ukraine everything it needs in order to win the war as quickly as possible and on Ukraine's terms. Full stop.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. We can come back to those issues too, including the $5 billion to be seized. It's, I'll even say, more than $5 billion in the unclassified annex. There's classified that has more. We can talk about those details. There's more to that's implementation of the Repo Act that the administration can move on in the next couple of months. Let's turn to David Kramer, Executive Director of the George W. Bush Institute. He is a leading expert on Russia and Ukraine. His many impressive affiliations over the years included serving as Assistant Secretary of State for DRL in the Bush administration. He was a professor at Florida International University, wrote the book on dealing with Putin's regime, and much more. So my question for David is, in light of the elections on Tuesday, what should U.S. policy be towards Ukraine? Floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Josh, thanks very much, and it's great to be with this panel. I agree with what Melinda laid out, and let me just elaborate a little bit. Continuing U.S. Military support for Ukraine, I think, is essential, and I do think that there is bipartisan support to do so. And as Melinda, I think, rightly put it, this is an opportunity for the incoming Trump administration to stand in stark contrast to the current Biden administration, which is to help Ukraine to victory. That is something the Biden administration never clearly enunciated. It's something the Trump administration could help Ukraine achieve. Second is to press the Europeans to do more. The Europeans are providing more assistance in dollar terms than the United States, but the Europeans can and should do more. Melinda's also right that the restrictions the Biden administration has imposed on our weapons also apply to some European weapon systems because there are U.S. parts in those systems, and the United States has the ability to veto any deployment of those weapon systems against Russia inside Russia. Third, and this one I realize may be a stretch to some people, but I do think an invitation to join NATO is important because it will be an essential part of providing security guarantees for Ukraine that will help end this war. No one wants this war to end sooner than Ukrainians, than Hannah and all of her fellow Ukrainian citizens, but they want the war to end in a way that it never happens again. And the best way to ensure that is to provide Article 5 security guarantees. An invitation today would not mean membership tomorrow. It would be a lengthy process, but it would be a signal that Putin does not have a de facto veto over Ukraine's aspirations, and that's something I think the new administration should support. Third, or fourth, I think, sorry, is, and Melinda touched on this, but I would extend it, which is not only should the United States seize Russian assets held in U.S. financial institutions, but all of our allies should do the same because we're talking about roughly $300 billion in assets frozen from Russia. That would help offset the costs of helping Ukraine not only fund its victory, but also fund its recovery. And that would defray the burden on the rest of us. It is unconscionable for me to think about having Russia regain these assets when they stupidly left them in Western financial institutions. Peace through strength is something the Trump administration, I think, will embrace. That means jobs for Americans because it means beefing up, our defense capabilities, and that will also help Ukraine. It's critically important that Ukraine has never asked for our men and women to go fight this fight for them. They do need our military assistance desperately, and they have shown what they can do with our assistance. They've also shown what they can do on their own through brilliant innovation, particularly when it comes to drone technology. We should support that. And then the last point I would make, Josh, is that the world is watching what we do. What we do in helping Ukraine to victory will redound to the benefit of Taiwan, it will redound to the benefit of our NATO allies, it will redound to the benefit of global stability. CRINC is watching what we do. CRINC is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. It is a threat to all of us. And the best way to confront CRINC is to help Ukraine to achieve victory. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. So last but not least, let's turn to GMF Senior Fellow Elena Prokopenko, who was an important figure going back to the Revolution of Dignity with her work with the reanimation package of reforms, known to many of you in the journalistic community through her advocacy over the years. And worked as an advisor to a member of Ukrainian parliament, the minister of finance, and now has become a leading figure in the Ukrainian diaspora of civil society experts in Europe, having worked for the UN, Council of Europe, Danish Embassy, European Endowment for Democracy, and she is our newest senior fellow at GMF. And so question for Elena to kind of share a European perspective on this. What further steps could the European Union take right now to support Ukraine? Floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think it is safe to say that whatever approach the US leadership takes towards Ukraine, Europe will have to step up and will have to take the lead in supporting Ukraine's defense efforts and macrofinancial stability. Unfortunately, Donald Trump's win comes at arguably the worst possible time in terms of Europe's political and economic shape and its ability to promptly coordinate. So the focus of the European countries is now largely on their own reshuffles, domestic turbulence, domestic crisis. And there is a concern in Brussels that member states may start approaching the new Donald Trump administration individually at the expense of the EU, and this may further weaken the European Union. That said, I see the acknowledgement in Europe that Donald Trump and his return will leave Europe with no choice but to take responsibility for its own defense, to invest more in defense, and to limit its reliance on the United States. And I think this message was quite clear yesterday at the Budapest summit. It was quite central to the summit, along with the message of many European leaders that support for Ukraine should continue, and that this support is not only in Ukraine's interest, but in the interest of Europe and the global security. What can Europe do to support Ukraine at this critical time? There are a number of, of tangible steps that still can be taken. On the military front, as you know, the situation at the front lines is critical, and only in October, Ukraine lost over 500 square kilometers, almost 200 square miles, to Russia. So the priority is still on the provision of Ukraine with modern military assistance. Secondly, Europe should lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons to strike military targets in Russia. Third, it is important to ensure a strong mandate for the new EU Defense Commissioner. That's the mandate that's being created here in Brussels as we speak. And fourth, in the military, on the military front, is that Europe needs to include Ukraine in its defense strategies, in its defense market, in its defense architecture, given all the unique experience that Ukraine has and all the technology that Ukraine has in this area. But further to what David said, of course, the most efficient and really the cheapest way for Europe to ensure its own security is to advance Ukraine's NATO membership prospects. Now to the economic area, what can Europe do? Europe can promptly deliver to Ukraine 45 billion euros in loans backed by the profits from over 200 billion Russian assets frozen in the West. And Europe can strengthen economic sanctions against Russia and finally close all the many loopholes enabling Russian entities to avoid those sanctions. And finally, on the Ukraine's European integration front, the EU needs to accelerate Ukraine's accession process and to simplify the procedure, the framework for this process. Now that the transatlantic integration may be more challenging, it's critical to help Ukraine become a member of the EU as soon as possible. And again, none of this is charity. It's all investment in the European and global security. All the measures that I've listed are in very clear interests of the EU and the global community. And now that Donald Trump is back to power, I think it should be the wake-up call for the European partners, and they should really acknowledge the threat that we're all up against and get their act together before it's too late. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Elena. And so with that, I will turn it back to Irvin to moderate the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Josh. And thank you to the speakers. Does anyone have any questions? Please go ahead and raise your hand. I'll call on you and go ahead and ask it. John Seward from Notice has the first question. Go ahead, John.
Hi, guys, and thank you for doing this panel. Really appreciate it. Obviously, the specter of Trump winning the most recent election is a very large topic in all of y'all's main points. One of the things that he's said quite distinctly is that he'll attempt to end the war inside of this next 11 weeks. And so I wanted to ask this panel both what the reality of that might look like, but also just with that sort of rhetoric, what the feeling is for Ukraine's possible outcome of this conflict? Thank you.
If you want, I'll start and then let others chime in. He won't be president, obviously, until January 20th. And so his ability to actually effectuate that kind of outcome is extraordinarily limited. But I imagine that there will be discussions, conversations between people representing his position and people representing both President Zelensky and his administration and Putin and his administration. I imagine those conversations will begin, but it's hard to imagine that it will be that there'll be much that can be accomplished between now and January 20th.
Thank you.
John, I'm reminded that it took Trump's team 16 months to leave the Iran negotiations. And President Trump, in his campaign, made a number of very large and complicated promises. So I think David's right that this is something that we should expect his administration to move on. But this is a very complicated topic. And I think as President Trump comes back into office and understands the implications of this policy, that he's unlikely to go forward with it and may have a change of heart.
Thank you. The next question is from Chris Cermak at Monocle. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks very much for doing this. A couple of questions, I guess. One was just with this election coming up, I'd be curious if in Kyiv there was anything that would have been done. Was there sort of planning for this kind of shift or potential shift in U.S. policy, maybe a look at sort of which other countries might be willing to step up support and kind of beefing up those contacts, for example, or anything else that might be done to think about what this means for Ukraine? And the other question I had, which I'll ask now as well, is just Elon Musk. I'm curious if there are views on that as well, given whether he enters the administration or not. Obviously, with Starlink was a crucial element of this war in Ukraine at the beginning. I'm curious if that's still the case now and whether there's any worry that, you know, some of that either support, technical support might shift as well.
Which panelists would like to take this?
So maybe I could start. Thanks for this question. And honestly, President Trump's re-election comes as no surprise, because in Ukraine we were in the mood that we have to be ready for both candidates. And actually, what I know, that presidential team and different expert community, they were working with both candidates team. And we do remember in Ukraine President Trump first term, and actually when the first lethal weapon to Ukraine, javelins, were sent, and also sanctions against Nord Stream 2 were imposed. And also some economic cooperation, General Electric and others. So it seems like Ukraine, and especially in the victory plan, the first point is the strategic economic potential. And I think Ukraine already proved that we have the strategic value of Ukraine, of course, is our people, but also we showed already then that in the war, technologies and innovations matter a lot, and especially Ukrainian long-range drones have already destroyed more than 200 military targets of the aggressor. And thanks to the defense industries, Ukraine is set to become one of the key global contributors to security. And we believe that one day Ukraine could become a hub of the defense industries in Europe. And I think it's also in the US strategic interest. and having critical raw minerals, titanium, lithium. And also, I'm very thankful to David and to Melinda for saying about NATO perspective for Ukraine, because I do believe that Ukraine as a NATO member in the future, I hope 33rd one, will contribute a lot. We already paying 50% of our budget. We are contributing to our defense and security. So Ukraine as a NATO member, remember when Trump during his first term, he was demanding 2% of GDP for all NATO members. So, but the threats are growing to the levels that I think the NATO countries should invest more, up to 3-4% of GDP for the security, which Ukraine is already champion in this sphere. So with innovations, with our drones, with our very, how to say, Neptune missile, very effective one. And also recently, Denmark, we signed a contract for producing howitzers, Bogdana, also Ukraine made. So I think it's really important that Ukrainians, because I visited recently Brussels, so I saw panic in some cabinets. They were afraid of Trump re-election, but in Ukraine, it's already 11 years. We remember Obama, Trump, Biden, and the key for us is security guarantees. And I think when Melinda mentioned Biden legacy, what Biden could deliver at the end of his presidency, I think we should talk about United States legacy. And because how we end the war, it's not about presidents, it's about US leadership, US credibility, and US as a leader of free world, and US as a superpower. Within last 2.5 years, I traveled to 30 countries, traveled to South Korea, Taiwan. So honestly, India, everyone was asking, Hannah, the credibility of the US and the West is in Ukraine. Depending how the war ends, also it's you shape the new world order, or you allow tyrannies to weaken West. And actually, we understand that China has global ambition of dominance. Putin wants new Yalta. So this is why it's important to explain for Trump, who likes to be winner, that Crimea has a huge potential of gas extraction, and Crimea, Russia started the war from invasion into Crimea, and the war should end with liberation of Crimea. And it's about maritime security, because we connect the dots between what happened in the Black Sea 10 years ago, and what happened then in the Red Sea, and what might happen in the Taiwan Strait. So I think US leadership is key. So I kindly ask Biden to lift restrictions on deep strikes and provide everything what we were promised but not delivered, and actually to prepare the ground for Trump second term, that this war will become this war will end with the Russian imperialist defeat, and actually build the legacy of the United States as a true leader of free world, and which defends democracy, freedom.
Thank you very much, Anna. Go ahead, Melinda.
Hey, Chris, thanks for that question. I think it's a bit hard to say what Musk's role is going to be and how involved he's going to be in foreign policy. So I'm going to hesitate to pull out my crystal ball today. I think the best thing that I can give you is we simply don't know a lot of, and I'm sorry that this is so banal, but everything depends on Trump's picks, and that there is an enormous gap between Grinnell and Pompeo on Russia-Ukraine policy. And I think it's also wise to go back and look at Trump's first administration. Many people have forgotten that Trump's actual policy was a lot tougher than we give him credit for. He was the president who authorized the use of Javelin missiles, and Obama refused to. And he also authorized, he extended sanctions on Crimea after Russia illegally invaded in 2014. So anything is possible with this administration. And I know that's not a very sexy topic and it's hard to write about, but that's the reality of the administration that we're looking at.
And Irvin, can I just add very quickly? Look, the Biden administration deserves credit for the sanctions regime and keeping allies united, providing assistance to Ukraine. But Ukrainians have been incredibly frustrated with the decision-making process and then the provision of assistance, the restrictions that have been imposed, particularly on these long-range weapon systems, and the failure to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join NATO. The Biden administration had two chances. It's not just a U.S. decision, granted, but the Trump administration has the ability and opportunity to undo those three things: expedite decision-making on weapon systems and assistance, lift the restrictions, and extend an invitation to NATO. Each administration, particularly going from Republican to Democrat or the other way around, looks to undo things of the previous administration. Ukraine gives the Trump administration a big opportunity to do so, to stand in contrast to what the current administration has done.
Thank you all kindly. Next question is from Ida at Ilta Sanomat in Finland. Ida, go ahead.
Thank you for this panel. I have two questions. Firstly, Vladimir Putin has congratulated Trump, and at some point they will probably discuss about the war in Ukraine. What can be expected from this discussion? And secondly, does Trump really care about small European countries like Finland? What kind of diplomacy does he understand? Thank you.
Well, I'll maybe jump in here. President Zelensky spoke with President Trump on Wednesday. President Putin extended his congratulations from Valdai, so they have not yet spoken. But I anticipate that there will be a call before too long between the two. I do hope that the incoming administration adopts the mantra of the outgoing administration, which is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And so Ukraine needs to be present at any conversations in determining its future. And so I do hope that there will be a full consultation with the Ukrainians on any discussions that may involve the United States and Russia.
And I'll just jump in to add that we have a positive start on that, on nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The fact that Trump spoke with Zelensky so quickly before he even spoke with Putin, that was a significant thing that I appreciated. And in terms of how those conversations may evolve, what Trump has said during the campaign is that he would tell Putin to agree to a ceasefire, or else the U.S. will heavily arm Ukraine. While he has said that he would tell Zelensky to agree to a ceasefire, or else the U.S. will pull back on assistance. And so from there, the negotiations will evolve. They'll bring in issues like, what would a demilitarized zone look like, and what type of security guarantees would there be, and some kind of understanding about, critically, continued Western provision of weapons to Ukraine. In those negotiations and around those terms, Putin will be looking to strike a deal that gives him time to rearm and try again to conquer all of Ukraine within the next few years before Trump leaves office, not repeating the mistake he made before of waiting until after Trump leaves office, and then he has to face a more unified alliance. I mean, this is coming so early in Trump's term that there will be time for all of that to unfold before, or maybe during, 2028. And the last thing that Trump is going to want is going to be a chaotic collapse a la Afghanistan 2.0 around that time. And so the most important red line in those negotiations for the United States and for its allies, and an issue that Ukraine can probably win on is going to be that the West will arm Ukraine to the teeth with any and all weapons and capacities needed to fully defend itself. And then, the other issues, important issues, will also come into play: the absence of any formal territorial concessions, even if Ukraine is not going to fight back at the moment, and strongly maintain DMZ and security guarantees. So there's a lot to come, and it's going to take time.
Thank you so much.
Irving, can I put
Next question,
an
Suzanne.
even
Go
sharper
ahead.
point on what Josh
Absolutely.
just said? And you can put it down under my name, not Josh's name, but I think this is what he's saying. I think he's saying we shouldn't assume that Trump will be a pushover in any negotiations. And it was instructive if you look at his comments after the meeting between Trump and Zelensky. He used the phrase "just war." So I think people are making a lot of assumptions about Trump, that he's just going to give Putin anything he wants, and that's naive.
Appreciate that. Next question is, go ahead.
I wanted to add a few words to briefly address the question about whether Trump cares about small European states. Well, I think most European states should be concerned, and if, for instance, the Baltics or Poland were to be attacked tomorrow, I'm not sure NATO will have the capacity to respond to this fast enough, and that's why I wanted to reiterate my point that Europe has to get serious about its unity around its own security and limit its reliance on the US. As I said, there are hopes here in Brussels about this new mandate of the EU Defense Commissioner, but there's a lot of pushback from various actors, including from NATO and from other actors here in Brussels and from member states regarding this mandate. And there is a push for making it as limited as possible because of the competition around it. And this is quite concerning, because this could be a strong mandate of the defense commissioner could make it possible to actually unite European defense, including the production, the defense industry. But so far, the sense of urgency is really missing, and that's quite concerning.
Thank you, Ellen. The next question goes to Josh Keating from Bach. And after Josh, I will be representing the time. I'll be pairing folks up with questions. So I'll call on two folks per question. Josh, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. Even if we can't make assumptions about what course of action Trump will take, I think it's fair to say, like, he views the world a little differently. His priorities are a little different. Would we expect to see Ukraine's, to use a terrible word, messaging in the United States to change? Under Biden, there was a lot of emphasis on the rules-based international order, defending democracy. Hannah's made a few references already to Ukraine's mineral resources and gas reserves in Crimea. Is that the kind of thing we'll expect to hear more of from President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government? And second quick question, just before the election, there were reports on Ukraine and Russia potentially restarting talks on limiting strikes on energy resources. Wondering if you know anything about the progress of those talks and if you expect to see more of that or perhaps expansions of those discussions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll start. So actually, President-elect Trump recognizes first Ukraine's blood sacrifices for the safety and security of the free world. And he mentioned during the meeting with President Zelensky back in September in New York. And also, he understands that innovations and the potential of Ukraine for defense industry of the United States and our engineers, our space technologies. I mentioned already Neptune missiles. So I think Olena mentioned before the EU Defense Commissioner and space. I think this is where Ukraine could contribute a lot and already contributed. When I visited Taiwan, so people were impressed by digitalization of Ukraine and innovations and drones. And so this is what Ukraine, even with the one hand tied back, thanks to the technologies and innovations, we have this innovations advantages in the battlefield. This is how we, with this constant limitation, we keep fighting and even manage to did Kursk incursion. But we understand that it's not with Trump philosophy. It's not about talking rules-based order. It's about very pragmatic approach. And honestly, Russia started the war against Ukraine with illegal annexation of Crimea. Why? Because Russian Kremlin regime, they had this fear that Ukraine, from importer of gas, could become a gas exporter. And actually, this is true. If you ask different people, different experts, the gas extraction industry in Ukraine, with investment for the US, could make Ukraine an exporter of the gas, and not just gas. So, and Russia always use gas, oil as a strategic corruption. So this is why Putin was afraid that, and they didn't allow previously for American companies and British companies to invest in extraction in the Black Sea. So this is why I think Ukraine won some cases against Russian Gazprom, and we will keep doing this. And I think it's important. I heard that some Trump team mentioned about oil embargo, that American companies, they want to sell more LNG to the European market, not to allow Russia. It's about competition, and it's also about industries. And let's be frank, do we all want to see how Russia and China in the occupied territories of Ukraine will extract critical raw minerals and will compete with the world democracies who will get first quantum computing or other technologies? No, when Trump was first-time president, this was the war just in the Crimea occupation and Donetsk and Lugansk region. Now this is the war drone, electronic warfare, and with artificial intelligence and robototechnics. So this is why critical minerals and technologies matters. And I think talking about negotiations, let's be frank, it's not just about territories. Ceasefire, someone is telling, Russia and especially Putin will never sign any ceasefire agreement or some negotiations until he sees that continuing the war in Ukraine will cost him everything. When he will see the risk to lose power is higher because of continuing the war in Ukraine. Russia already, what we've seen with economy, they face problems with economy, with mobilization, and North Korean troops, I'm not sure, will help them. But I think answering on this question, so it's really important to be more pragmatic and to explain how Ukraine could contribute to NATO, why it's in the interest of American citizens that Ukraine become NATO member, and why strengthening bilateral cooperation. It's about also American economy, because all defense industries in the US, they are also earning money, helping us and modernizing their technologies. Coming back to your question on energy, in Ukraine, we learned a lot. We can never trust Russia, especially after August 26, the most massive cruise ballistic missiles with kamikaze drones. And for the first time ever, they used cluster warheads to extend the damages in the substations in critical energy infrastructure, even creating the risk of nuclear catastrophe. So Russia is daily. I'm sitting now in Kiev. So daily they are attacking residential buildings, and not just Kiev, Poltava, Kharkiv, using glide bombs, everything. So we need more anti-air defense systems. We need to be allowed to deep striking in and to do it successful. And honestly, we have some, the number of objects, military targets, which with the support of our friends, Russia will be weakening. And then Putin will understand that he cannot think about New Yalta. He will think how to save his power by withdrawing Russian troops from Ukraine and pay reparations, because it's important. And let me support my American friends that Repo Act is key, and I'm very thankful to American Congress for adopting this. So now administration should do better job, and I fully support the idea that not just windfall profits, but also confiscation of the whole 300 billions is a key, because negative economic consequences of Russia fueling mercenaries in Africa, in other continents, it needs to be stopped. So I think it's concluding. We do not trust Russia and all these energy talks. Honestly, Russia is now depends on Ukraine because they need to the transit of gas 5 years on contract is ending January 1st, 2025. And for Putin, it's very important to get another 5 years of contract to transport gas via Ukraine gas transit system. I do remember 2019, when the only reason for Putin to visit Paris for Normandy meetings, the last higher level leadership meeting of Normandy format with Zelensky, Macron, Merkel, and Putin, the only reason was to prolong the gas agreement, which is ending soon. And for Russia, it's important to keep transporting gas to some European countries, which are very under Russian dependence, and sometimes behaving as a Russian proxy in NATO and in the EU. And we need to stop this practice and not to use energy as a strategic corruption, actually, when some political leaders are dividing NATO and the EU.
Can I just add very quickly on Josh's question about the messaging? Putin has caused the greatest crisis on the European continent since World War II. Europe was the source of 2 world wars in the last century. If Russia is not stopped by Ukraine, and I mean by, not in Ukraine, if Russia is not stopped by Ukraine, if we don't help Ukraine stop Russia, then we run the risk of World War III. And that is something President Trump has talked extensively about, that he wants to help avoid World War III. And I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you all. The next 2 questions I'll call on Bochin Han and Viola Geiger. Bochin's from September Morning Post and Viola is from Just Security. Bochin, ask your questions and I'll go to Viola if you answer it.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Can you talk a bit about the fault lines we might see within the Republican Party regarding support for Ukraine, especially as some of the names being floated for the Trump admin appear to have diverging stances?
Thank you. Viola.
Yeah, hi,
Yeah,
thank
there
you.
we go. Hi. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for doing this. Is there room to broaden the argument related to China beyond just Taiwan? And that is, even if certain elements of the administration, the incoming administration, were not terribly fussed at the idea of emboldening Russia, or didn't think that was so much of a threat that they are particularly concerned about, they do seem to be very concerned about China, and not only for the angle of Taiwan and what Ukraine's fate holds for Taiwan, but also generally China's strength and role and sense of being emboldened in the world as a result of its alliance with Russia in this war. Is there an effective argument to be made that is broader than just Taiwan on China?
I'll maybe start if you want on China. Viola, thanks for the question. I think North Korea adds a new element to this. China cannot like the fact that the Russians have bought the North Korean involvement in this war beyond what North Korea was providing in terms of missiles and ammunition, but now actual troops from North Korea. I don't imagine that sits terribly well with Beijing. And so I think that's another angle we can play up. But let me also emphasize Putin yesterday in Valdai stressed that he would not be interested anytime in working together with the United States against China. And I think that's been true for years and years. There are some in the United States who argue we should partner with Russia against China. Yet just yesterday was the latest confirmation from Putin that he is not interested in such a deal.
Thank you. And on
Thank you.
Boatman's question about fault lines and GOP support for Ukraine, what do you panelists care to speak to that?
There are divisions within the Republican Party. There's also a lot of support among Republicans. It's important, I think, to remember, and Melinda can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe a single Republican who voted for the April assistance package suffered a defeat in the primaries in this election year. And so it has not cost anyone politically by supporting Ukraine. And Speaker Johnson, I think, played a very important role in getting that assistance package across the finish line. It took a long time, of course, and that was costly to Ukraine, not just in military terms, but I think for Ukrainian morale. I hope we won't see similar delays, but I think a lot of this will be set by the tone that President Trump puts in place as well.
And I'll just add to that, there are divisions like that in every administration and political party. We've seen them in this current administration, and there have been, times and issues on which those who are, more spooked by Putin's nuclear bluff had the upper hand and in debates and caused weakness that now provides an opening for Trump and for the advisors who understand that and understand Trump, the Pompeos and O'Briens, the ones who know that he wants to come out looking strong and will and can advise him in how he is in a unique position to do things that Biden left the door open. But there are even things that Biden could not be able to do in terms of really rallying the American population to win. Trump likes a winner. To Josh Keating's question, that's a difference in the language that you will see, and Trump is in position to be able to explain to the voters who listen to only him that this is winnable and how it could be done in a way that if by taking that opportunity, it could be a strategic turn, surprises everyone, but goes down no less historic than Nixon going to China. So there are differences, and will continue to be, and we'll have to watch it.
Two sentences. I know you want to move on. It's wrong to treat this as static too, right? This is public opinion. A majority of Americans continue to support Ukraine. I just got back from Shreveport, Louisiana, which is Mike Johnson's hometown, and I interacted with hundreds of people there, and there's nothing but support for Ukraine in a very red part of America. So I think it's incumbent on Ukraine, on civil society, and on Americans who support Ukraine to make the case and to make sure that Americans understand why this country matters to us directly. And look, we may need to use different arguments to Josh's question. Absolutely, the arguments are going to change. They'll be more straightforward and more transactional. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe some of the arguments got a little lazy over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Melinda. And I know we're boarding up on time, but I want to get two more questions. One from Michael Wasiera from The Insider, and next from Masahiro Ekoshi from Nikkei, DC Bureau. Michael, you first.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is for David, and I'd also like to hear Hannah. Just concretely, in your understanding of the situation, under what circumstances would the Russian side stop fighting?
Question.
Do you want to take a
Next,
second one? Yeah.
Yeah, Masahiro.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. I just like, I also would like to ask the question about North Korea. What impact do you think the incoming Trump administration will have on the cooperative relationship between Russia and North Korea and also China? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, David. Hannah?
All right, I'll address Michael's question. I think there are two conditions, Michael, in which Russia would stop fighting. One is if we force Ukraine to capitulate. And even then, I'm not sure Russia would stop fighting until the Ukrainian government is overthrown. Russia controls all of Ukraine. Ukraine is forced into neutrality. Then maybe Putin would stop. The other scenario is when his forces on the front lines have had enough. And I think we have seen some indications of that, having to resort to Russian prisons to staff up the military campaign, now North Koreans. And so it's obviously taken a horrible toll on Ukraine, but it has also taken a tremendous toll on Russia, with estimates now on the Ukrainian side, at least, of that Russia has suffered more than 700,000 killed and wounded in fighting. It's a staggering number. And so I think the thing to keep an eye on in terms of the Russian ability to continue fighting is the morale on the front lines. It's something I think we can never measure. We can't take a survey of that. But if you see more defections, and this is something I think we should have been encouraging from the beginning, encouraging more defections from the Russian front line, offering Russians safe haven if they didn't want to keep fighting, if they haven't committed war crimes, and just giving up. You have Russian forces that enforce the troops who are there to stay on the front lines. They kill their own people if they try to run. And so that's an indication that this is not a terribly popular war unless they feel that they have the upper hand and are fighting, and we can affect that calculus.
Just to add, I fully support what David just said, that Russians have an advantage in the air and in manpower, but enemies' losses in the war are significantly higher than those of Ukraine. But still, there is no such like unacceptable losses for Russia. They don't care about people. So this is what people in the Western capitals don't understand. So, but there is situation already in Russia when mobilizing more people create problem for Putin regime. And this is why we've seen this North Koreans, and besides North Koreans, there are all other mercenaries that they recruit from other countries. I think when Russia starts, let me remind you and maybe quote Putin, which I never do, but this is important. December 2021, Putin debated online with Mr. Sokurov, how to say it in English, Sokurov. And when Sokurov told Putin, Moscow is the capital of Moscow. People in Kremlin, they don't care about other republics. And there are more than 200 territorial claims inside Russian Federation. Putin he was very angry, and he responded to Mr. Sukhorov telling, do you want Russian Federation to become a size of Moscow? This is what NATO wants, but it's never happened. So I think Putin understands, because he said about 200 territorial conflicts inside Russia with territorial claims. So he is afraid, because remember what Putin said, that the biggest geopolitical tragedy was the Soviet Union collapse. So Putin is afraid of Russian disintegration. Putin is afraid of Russian de-imperialization and actually decolonization. So this is his biggest fear. And this is why we Ukrainians today, I'm wearing Make Russia Pay t-shirt. But we have another t-shirt, Make Russia Small Again. So actually, this is one of the Putin's fear, but actually Russian imperialistic ambitious has to be small, that Russia never attack other sovereign nations. And I think this is really important. And also problems with economy. Russia cannot sustain the war in long run. Look at their some of economic facts. And this is why China is helping. This is about the role of China. Without China already financial support, supply with dual-use products, and other stuff, Russia and China signed already more than 30 agreements in different spheres, space, defense, and others. This is a threat to the United States. Both Russia is a threat to the United States and China and others. Axis of evil. So for Trump, second term compared to the first term, the goal, the task is even harder. This is why I think all these negotiations within 24 hours, it's important as a presidential campaign rhetoric. But in reality, I think it's really important, if needed, to provide, I don't know, Tomahawk for Ukraine, lift restriction on deep strikes, do oil embargo, something when Putin will understand that the risk of Russia collapse is so high that for him, it's better to leave Ukraine, to pay these reparations, but to save Russian Federation. But I think this is, the West has this experience with the Soviet Union, but the key is for us, for Ukrainians, that unfortunately, within 11 years of ongoing Russian aggression, we've never seen a victory strategy, because the defeat of Russia is something that people can, in White House, in State Department, Pentagon, were thinking like impossible. Don't be afraid. And actually, I think this is not about nuclear blackmail. It's about not preparedness for different scenarios in case of Russian military defeat, which might cause Russian disintegration. But actually, this is a serious question. And I think when Putin sees that the West is serious in supporting Ukraine and supplying everything needed for Russian military defeat in Ukraine, then he will reconsider his plans and actually will understand that he is gonna really lose everything he has.
Thank you, Hanna. And to refresh for the panelists, could someone speak to Masahiro's question on Trump's related impact on the DPRK in China here?
I'll just say, if nobody else wants to jump in, I'll just say that it sort of gets at what Hanna was just saying. Neither Putin nor Kim cares about their own people. And so you see two leaders who are willing to throw human beings at a problem that Putin created, wholly unprovoked and unjustified, and Kim willing to send his forces ostensibly under the pretext that they'll get some fighting experience, but they're more likely to be treated like cannon fodder, much like Putin treats his own forces. And I think that is a reflection of what Putin and Kim have in common, which is no attachment of value to human life other than their own.
Thank you kindly. Thank you everyone for coming. If you write on this, please remember we always appreciate when you include that it happened at the German Marshall Fund hosted the conversation. Helps us see it for our clips and amplify the stories. Thank you to the panelists. We really appreciate this, everyone. Sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. That's a personal failing on my part. I apologize. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me and I can pass it along to the speakers too. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks for doing this.
God bless you.